wasn't just a watch. It was our family's last treasure. Linda said it was only worth $500. But behind our backs, she sold it for $3,500. And that lie destroyed everything. It was an unusually quiet evening when I stumbled into the attic of my late grandfather's house. Dust floated lazily in the fading sunlight as I pushed aside boxes of forgotten clothes and broken furniture. In the corner, beneath a torn piece of cloth, I found a small wooden box carved with strange floral designs. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing an antique pocket watch, unlike anything I had ever seen. Its golden case was engraved with intricate patterns, and though tarnished with age, it gleamed as if holding a secret. I knew instantly this was no ordinary trinket. It was a piece of history. My family had always struggled to make ends meet, and I thought, maybe this watch could change everything. But I had no idea that this discovery would not only test our bonds, but also reveal the darkest side of someone I trusted the most, Linda. I rushed downstairs with the watch still in my hand, calling my parents to see what I had found. My father's eyes widened, and my mother gasped softly, whispering that it might have belonged to my great-grandfather. None of us knew its true value, but we agreed it could be worth something. That's when Linda walked in. She was my cousin, always charming, always pretending to be helpful. "Wow, that looks antique," she said, running her fingers over the golden surface as if it belonged to her. "I know some people who deal with rare items. Let me help you sell it. You'll only get cheated if you go alone." Her voice was sweet, persuasive, almost comforting. My parents looked at each other, uncertain but hopeful. We had trusted Linda before, and she had never given us a reason to doubt her. At least, not yet. And so, without hesitation, we agreed to let her handle it. That decision changed everything. The very next day, Linda took the watch, promising she would return within a week. She told us confidently, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you get a fair price." My parents smiled, relieved, because we needed the money. Bills were piling up, and opportunities were few. Linda left with the watch tucked safely into her handbag, her smile radiant, her words warm. For the first time in months, my mother hummed while cooking, and my father looked less burdened. We all believed better days were coming. A week passed quickly, then another. Finally, Linda returned, a bright grin on her face. "Good news," she announced. "I sold the watch for $500. Here's the money." She placed a neat stack of bills on the table. My parents clapped their hands in joy, thanking her endlessly. We celebrated that night with simple food, our hearts light. None of us imagined that behind Linda's smile hid a secret worth thousands. For a while, life felt easier. The $500 helped us cover bills and buy groceries. My parents even set aside a little for emergencies. But something nagged at me. The watch had looked valuable, far more than a few $100s. One evening, while browsing online, I stumbled upon the collector's forum discussing antique watches. A similar model to ours was listed at over $3,000. My heart skipped. Could Linda have lied? I brushed off the thought, convincing myself I was being paranoid. Linda was family. she wouldn't deceive us. Yet doubts began to creep in whenever I saw her. She avoided eye contact, changed topics quickly, and seemed strangely defensive when I mentioned the watch. My instincts told me something wasn't right. But how could I prove it? The truth arrived like a storm. A friend of mine who worked at a jewelry store pulled me aside one afternoon. "Didn't your cousin sell an antique watch recently?" he asked. My chest tightened. "Yes. Why?" I replied. He sighed and shook his head. "Because I overheard a dealer bragging. He bought a golden pocket watch from a woman named Linda for $3,500. Said it was a steal." My blood ran cold. 3,500, not 500. My hands trembled as rage consumed me. Linda had looked us in the eyes, handed us a fraction of the money, and lied without hesitation. All the trust, all the love we had for her shattered in that instant. I could almost hear her laugh in my ears, mocking us. I knew I had to tell my parents, but I also knew this revelation would destroy our family forever. That night, I gathered the courage to confront my parents. My voice shook as I told them everything. The dealer, the $3,500, and Linda's betrayal. My father's face turned pale, while my mother clutched her chest in disbelief. "No, not Linda," she whispered. But the evidence was undeniable. The room felt colder, heavier, as if the very walls absorbed our pain. My father slammed his fist on the table, his voice breaking. "She cheated us. Her own family." My mother wept quietly, muttering Linda's name, as though saying it aloud could erase the betrayal. For the first time in years, the house felt lifeless. That night, none of us could sleep. The joy Linda had given us with her lies now turned into a poison that ran through our veins, and deep inside me, a fire began to burn. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, betrayal, and revenge. The next morning, I couldn't hold back any longer. I called Linda and asked her to meet me at a cafe downtown. She arrived, dressed elegantly, her face glowing as if nothing was wrong. "Why so serious?" she joked, sipping her coffee. My hands shook as I placed my phone on the table. "Linda," I said firmly, "I know you sold the watch for $3,500. Don't lie." For a moment, her smile froze. Then she leaned back and laughed softly, a chilling laugh. "So you found out," she whispered. "And what will you do? Cry? Tell your parents? They're too weak to fight me." My blood boiled. I wanted to shout, to expose her right there, but her cold, fearless eyes silenced me. "You see," she continued, "this world belongs to those who take. You're too soft to survive." She left, her perfume lingering, her words cutting deeper than any blade. When I returned home, I told my parents about the confrontation. My mother collapsed into tears, while my father's anger erupted like a volcano. "She's dead to us," he roared. But grief weighed heavily in his voice, as though disowning Linda tore something from his soul. Days passed, yet the wound grew deeper. Family gatherings became tense. Whispers spread among relatives. Some sided with us, others defended Linda, claiming money wasn't worth destroying blood ties. But they didn't feel the sting of betrayal like we did. The laughter we once shared with Linda became a haunting memory. Every smile she had given us now felt like a mask. And though my parents wanted to move on, I couldn't. My nights were filled with visions of Linda's mocking face, her hands clutching our stolen treasure. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was war. I started researching Linda's life quietly, where she spent her money, who she dealt with, what secrets she kept hidden. Through whispers and casual questions, I learned she had been frequenting upscale boutiques and restaurants, spending lavishly. It made me sick. That watch, our family's legacy, was now fueling her greed and arrogance. One evening, scrolling through social media, I saw her posing with expensive jewelry, hashtags bragging about her success. Each picture was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Rage grew into obsession. I promised myself I would not rest until I made her pay, not just financially, but emotionally. She needed to feel the same pain, the same emptiness she had inflicted on us. And so, I began to plan. I started small and smart. I visited the dealer my friend had mentioned, pretending excitement about selling a family heirloom. He was slick, full of charm, but sloppy when it came to records. I asked casual questions, watched his expressions, and left with a name and an address in my pocket. Then I visited the boutiques Linda frequented, pretending to window shop, letting my phone camera catch license plates and faces. I spoke to waiters who remembered the woman who paid in cash, no questions asked. Every small detail built my map. I wasn't acting on impulse anymore. I was gathering proof. Evidence, I realized, would be the only weapon that could cut through Linda's lies and expose the truth to a family that wanted to forget. My patience paid off. Late one night, after weeks of probing, I found a receipt tucked between the pages of an online marketplace's seller account. Linda's alias, a transfer to the dealer, and a number that matched the boutique's manager. My heart pounded. Proof at last. I printed everything, neat and cold. Screenshots, dates, amounts. Holding the paper felt like holding fire. I could go to the police, but I knew how easy it was for moneyed people to bury complaints. Instead, I made copies and distributed them, quietly, to a few relatives who had always resented Linda's arrogance. I watched as whispers replaced polite smiles. The first cracks in her social armor had begun. I didn't rush to shout the truth. Instead, I planted seeds. At family dinners, I dropped casual remarks about how easy it was for people to lie when money glittered in their hands. I mentioned stories of scams I'd read about. Then watched Linda's face when relatives exchanged glances. At the market, I let a cousin overhear me talking about antique valuations, then ensured the news reached ears likely to spread it. Gossip is a merciless tool. In the right hands, stays. It becomes a blade. As doubt spread, Linda's confident smile wavered. She started to watch her back, to soften her laughter when my name came up. For the first time, she felt what we had felt after her betrayal. One morning, I emailed a local blogger who covered rare antiques and family stories, an angle they loved. I didn't give them the full truth. I offered curiosity and a hint of scandal, a family heirloom sold under suspicious circumstances. The blogger loved it. Within days, an article appeared, measured, not accusatory, but enough to push the matter into the public sphere. Comments flowed from people who'd been wronged by scans. Linda panicked. Her social posts turned defensive. Then stealthy. She stopped. She didn't sit still. Linda launched a counterattack born of panic. Messages to relatives, pleading innocence, public posts about family loyalty, and whispered promises that she had meant well. She framed herself as the victim of misunderstanding. Some relatives softened, moved by her crocodile tears. But the receipts and the dealer's name were concrete. I watched her try to win hearts she hadn't earned and felt a quiet satisfaction. Her charm, once effortless, now looked rehearsed. That arrogance, her shield for years, had cracks. She smiled at gatherings, but the conversations changed tone. Where once she walked as ruler of attention, now she navigated a world that suspected her every move. I needed a decisive step, something that could not be argued away. I arranged a meeting with the dealer under a neutral pretext, offering to sell another item for an elderly neighbor. He took the bait and boasted about recent profitable purchases. I kept my cool, while he bragged about the beautiful pocket watch he'd bought from a woman named Linda, and how he'd flipped it for a tidy profit. I recorded him, voice only, no dramatics, and afterward confronted him with the evidence I had. Faced with the paper trail and the knowledge that I could bring his boasting into the light, he agreed to sign a brief statement acknowledging the $3,500 sale. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough. A dealer's written note that could be shown to anyone who still doubted. Armed with the dealer's note and screenshots, I sat my parents down and placed everything on the table. My mother's hands trembled as she read. My father's face went ashen. The house seemed to shrink, the air thick with past laughter now soured. We called an extended family meeting and laid the documents before them. Some relatives gasped, others cried, and a few stood in stunned silence. Linda's supporters tried to dismiss the papers as fabrications. But the dealer's note carried weight. The youngest cousins demanded honesty. The elders, bound by tradition, found it impossible to watch the truth and still pretend. For the first time, Linda found herself isolated in a room where nobody, no matter how polite, fully trusted her. I expected anger, but what I saw next was something darker: desperation. Linda's face crumpled, not always acting, but sometimes genuine panic. She pleaded, cried, and promised to make amends. She offered money, much more than $500, saying she had thought the watch wasn't worth more and had been worried about buyers. My father, still proud, refused the cash. "It's not about money," he said, voice cracking. "It's about trust." That line struck hard. Linda realized the depth of what she'd destroyed. But remorse alone wouldn't rebuild the years of lies. She started making calls to allies, trying to find witnesses to discredit the dealer, or to claim the documents were altered. Her moves were obvious now. The people who watched her had already seen too much. I had to make sure there was no escape route. The dealer's note was good, but I wanted a public, undeniable exposure. I organized a modest local event themed around family heirlooms and invited neighbors, relatives, and one of the local reporters who had shown interest. I prepared a short talk, less about evidence, more about respect, legacy, and honesty, and I filmed Linda's reaction. When I casually mentioned a costly watch, sold to a dealer named in the article, cameras flashed and ears perked. The dealer slipped, contradicting himself in front of the reporter. The video captured it. Hesitation, the name, the sale amount. The local paper followed up. The trap worked. Linda's denials looked weaker next to the record. Her allies dwindled. With the local article and the recorded contradictions, news spread beyond our small circle. Social media amplified the story. Family friends who once defended Linda now asked awkward questions. Comments under pictures turned cold. People who had come for her parties started avoiding invitations. Linda tried to explain, to laugh it off as a misunderstanding. But the narrative had shifted. At the market, vendors who had once greeted her warmly gave her curt nods. Her credit lines, which depended on reputational goodwill, began to fray. The extravagance she'd enjoyed, dinners, jewelry, favors, started to look like a house built on borrowed approval. Watching her stumble through a world that had once applauded her was both painful and vindicating. Pride made monsters. Linda, cornered and furious, struck back not with honesty, but with spite. She filed a petty defamation complaint through a family lawyer, claiming the dealer's note was forged and accusing me of slander. In court, small claims would drag the matter out and give her breathing room. The lawyer's presence intimidated some relatives, and a few who'd sided with us began to hesitate. I expected legal wrangling, and I welcomed it. Anything in public would extend the scrutiny only further. I prepared my evidence, recordings, receipts, messages, and met with a sympathetic legal aide who agreed to advise informally. The fight was shifting arenas, but I was ready. Linda's move was predictable. When you have nothing left, you swing wildly. The courtroom was small, almost ordinary, yet it felt like a stage where every word mattered. Linda arrived in a tailored dress, her lawyer beside her, and offered a cold glance across the room. I sat quietly with my folder of evidence, hands steady, though my heart raced. The judge listened to her complaint, her lawyer's carefully chosen words about character assassination. Then it was my turn. I laid out the receipts, the screenshots, the dealer's signed note, and finally, the audio recording. Each piece tightened the noose of truth. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Linda's expression shifted. First anger, then nervous flickers she couldn't hide. For the first time, her lies met a wall she couldn't charm her way through. A dealer had been summoned, and he looked like a man caught between fire and ash. At first he tried vague answers, but under questioning, he faltered. The judge pressed, "Did you or did you not purchase a gold pocket watch for $3,500? His silence was damning. Finally, he admitted he had. The court recorded his statement. Linda's lawyer attempted to spin it, claiming it was a legitimate sale, but the date aligned with the heirloom's disappearance. A judge raised an eyebrow. The gallery whispered. I could see Linda gripping the table so tightly, her knuckles whitened. The story she had spun for months collapsed in front of witnesses she once controlled. Her empire of deception was falling, brick by brick. The judge didn't deliver an immediate ruling. Instead, he reserved judgment, saying the evidence was serious and substantial. That pause gave Linda time to breathe, but it also gave me time to spread the truth wider. News of the court hearing leaked. Local papers published small columns, and family friends who had ignored the drama finally saw it documented. Linda's name became a quiet cautionary tale, whispered in coffee shops. She avoided public places, ashamed of stares. The waiting was its own punishment. For once, she wasn't in control of the narrative. Others were, and she hated it. I almost pitied her. Linda, who once thrived in crowded rooms, now walked alone. Her phone buzzed less. Party invitations stopped, and relatives ignored her calls. Those who answered spoke curtly. She lingered outside boutiques, but rarely went inside. The money that once flowed seemed suddenly thin. Even her closest friend stopped appearing at her side. She tried to cling to old routines, posting forced smiles online. But the comments had dried up. She lived in silence, haunted not just by what she lost, but by the memory of when people admired her. Betrayal had bought her diamonds, but it had cost her the only currency that mattered: trust. During those weeks, my father surprised me. Sitting by the window, he spoke softly. Revenge feels sweet, but it can also harden your heart. Remember why you did this. His voice was frail, yet firm. It wasn't for hatred. It was for truth. His reminder cut deep. I realized I hadn't fought Linda simply to see her fall. I had fought to reclaim dignity stolen by lies. That night, as I lay awake, I decided I wouldn't chase her destruction further. I would let the truth finish its work. Linda's punishment was already unfolding in ways no court could measure. Weeks later, the judgment arrived. The court dismissed Linda's complaint, citing clear evidence against her. The dealer's statement, my documents, and the timeline formed an undeniable case. The judge stopped short of criminal charges, but labeled her actions dishonest and deceptive. For Linda, it was worse than a fine. It was written in public record. Her name, once associated with wealth and charm, was now tied to betrayal. The ruling spread quickly among relatives and neighbors. Even those who had hesitated to believe me accepted the truth. Linda's voice of denial had been silenced by the weight of law. The fallout was sharp. Some relatives cut ties with Linda completely, unwilling to forgive. Others, softer at heart, argued for reconciliation. Family gatherings became tense, with empty chairs and hushed conversations. My parents chose peace but stood firm. Trust must be earned again. Linda tried to approach them once, carrying gifts and soft apologies, but my father refused to open the door. The wound was still raw. I watched quietly, knowing healing would take years, if it came at all. Families break, not by storms, but by the cracks lies carve over time. Unable to restore her reputation, Linda spiraled. She sold jewelry to pay debts. Her apartment grew quiet, and even her once perfect appearance seemed tired. Former allies ghosted her calls. I heard she begged the dealer for help, but he distanced himself. He had his own reputation to salvage. Linda, the woman who once bathed in applause, now walked shadows. I saw her once across the street, makeup smeared, shoulders bent. For a moment, I felt a sting of sorrow. She was still family. But then I remembered the gold watch, my parents' heartbreak. and her merciless betrayal. Choices had consequences. She was living hers. With the drama fading, I began to rebuild my life. I spent time with my parents, listening to old stories, cherishing the bond Linda had nearly destroyed. I picked up new hobbies, reconnected with cousins, and even pursued business opportunities that had once been overshadowed by chaos. I wasn't defined by Linda's betrayal anymore. I was defined by how I responded. And those scars remained. I felt stronger. The ordeal had taught me resilience, strategy, and the importance of truth. Pain had shaped me into someone who no longer feared betrayal, because I had survived it and emerged unbroken. One evening, I sat with my father as he held an old photo of the golden pocket watch. His eyes watered, but he smiled faintly. "It's gone, but the memory remains," he said. I realized the watch wasn't just metal. It was a symbol of heritage, of stories told through generations. Linda had stolen it, yes, but she couldn't erase its meaning. I promised him that someday I would buy back something worthy to honor that legacy, not as a replacement, but as a tribute. The betrayal had hurt, but it would not define our family's history. Love and resilience would. Months passed before a letter arrived. It was from Linda. The handwriting was shaky, the tone softer than I had ever known. She admitted greed had blinded her, that lies had trapped her in a web she could not escape. She begged for forgiveness, not for wealth, but for peace. My parents read it silently. My mother wiped her eyes. My father remained stern. They chose not to respond, at least not yet. For me, the letter marked a turning point. Linda was no longer the villain in control. She was a broken soul seeking redemption. Whether she deserved it was another story. Not long after, I received a call from an antique collector. He had read about our story in a paper and wanted to help. He couldn't restore the original watch, but he offered to sell us a similar heirloom at a fair price, saying, "Every legacy deserves a symbol." I accepted. Saving for it took months, but when I finally brought it home, my father held it with trembling hands. Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time since the betrayal, I saw true peace in his eyes. We couldn't recover the past, but we had created something new, something honest. As we healed, Linda's decline reached its peak. She faced lawsuits from others she had wronged, creditors, business partners, even old friends she had cheated. Her name was blacklisted in circles she once dominated. Without allies or wealth, she faded into obscurity. Occasionally, rumors surfaced of her working odd jobs, far from the glamorous life she craved. Each rumor was tinged with irony. The woman who sold a legacy for $3,500 had lost everything money could buy. Her punishment wasn't prison. It was a slow, relentless erasure from the world she once ruled. I often thought about Linda. Did she deserve forgiveness? Perhaps. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. She had written her story with greed, and the ending belonged to her choices. For me, the journey had been about truth, resilience, and family. Betrayal had burned us, but it had also revealed strength we didn't know we had. I no longer carried hatred in my heart. I carried lessons: to trust wisely, to protect what matters, and to remember that no amount of gold can replace honesty. Years later, the new heirloom sat proudly on our mantelpiece, not as a reminder of theft, but as a symbol of survival. My parents told stories to grandchildren about both the lost watch and the new one, not of despair, but of resilience. Linda's name was barely spoken, except as a warning of where greed leads. Our family had been scarred, but not broken. Truth had prevailed, dignity had been reclaimed, and love had endured. The legacy lived on, not in gold, not in wealth, but in the bonds no betrayal could destroy.